I still remember the exact moment those words slipped from his mouth. They weren't shouted or said in anger. They were whispered, calm, almost casual, but they cut deeper than any scream ever could. "You're too old for love, Lisa?" That's what Daniel said. My Daniel, the man who once promised to grow old with me, was now looking me in the eye and telling me that my time for love had expired, as if it were a carton of milk past its date. I stood there in the kitchen, hands trembling as I stirred my coffee, watching the spoon spin round and round like my thoughts, trying to understand when everything between us had started to rot. For 15 years, I gave him my best years, my 20s, my 30s, my energy, my laughter, my faith. I was there when he built his business, when he failed, when he succeeded again. I cheered him on through every storm. And now, standing there in that cold morning light, he looked at me like I was a stranger in his house. "Daniel," I asked softly, "what do you mean?" He didn't flinch. He just shrugged. "I mean, we're not the same anymore. You've changed. You're older now. You don't have the same spark you used to." I laughed then because the only other option was crying. "Older?" I repeated. "We're the same age, Daniel." But he didn't laugh. He just stared at me, eyes glazed, like he had already made peace with the idea that our story had reached its end. That was the moment I realized, sometimes betrayal doesn't come from lies or affairs. Sometimes it comes from indifference, from the slow, quiet way someone stops looking at you with warmth. He went to work after that as if nothing happened, and I stood there in the empty kitchen, replaying every word. I was 40, not young, not old, just in that middle place where people start to question their worth. I looked at myself in the mirror that day and tried to find what he couldn't see. I saw lines that came from laughter, scars that came from survival, eyes that had seen love, loss, and everything in between. But I didn't see someone unworthy of love. Not until he said it. That's the thing about words. They have the power to rewrite how you see yourself. For weeks, I pretended everything was fine. I cooked dinner. I smiled. I played the part of the wife who didn't care. But every time he stayed late at work, every time he glanced at his phone and smiled faintly, I felt the truth creeping closer. One evening, I saw a message flash on his screen while he was in the shower. A woman's name I didn't recognize. "I can't wait to see you again," it said. I stared at it for a full minute, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out the sound of running water. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just felt a strange calmness, like my body had decided it had been through enough pain for one lifetime. When he came out, I asked, "Who's Anna?" He froze, towel in hand. "She's a client," he said too quickly. "A client?" I repeated, watching his reflection in the mirror. "She can't wait to see you again?" He avoided my eyes. That was answer enough. I didn't scream. I didn't demand an explanation. I just walked out of the room, because in that moment I realized something powerful. I had been begging for love in a house where I was already invisible. That night, I made a decision. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew this. I wasn't going to let his words define the rest of my life. I would show him and myself that love doesn't have an expiration date. That spark he thought I lost? I was going to find it again, even if it burned everything I once believed in. The next morning, the house felt heavier than ever. Every corner reminded me of promises that had faded. The framed photo on the mantel where Daniel and I smiled on our 10th anniversary now looked like a ghost from a life I didn't belong to anymore. I went through the motions, making coffee, packing his lunch, pretending everything was normal, but inside I was quietly shutting every door that led back to him. When he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a list, not of chores or bills, but of the things I had given up for him, dreams that once made me feel alive, learning to paint, traveling, starting my own small design studio. Somewhere between being his supporter and his shadow, I had stopped being me. That thought hurt more than the affair itself. A week later, I signed up for a community art class. It wasn't a big decision. It was just something small, something that was mine. I remember walking into that bright studio, the smell of paint and turpentine filling the air, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of excitement. The instructor, a tall, kind-eyed man named Adam, greeted everyone with a warmth that instantly softened the edges of my nerves. He wasn't young, but he carried an energy that made him seem timeless, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and being comfortable with it. We started with simple sketches, charcoal on paper, and as my hands moved, the noise of my thoughts began to fade. Every stroke felt like a quiet rebellion against the version of myself Daniel had reduced me to. After class, Adam stopped by my easel and said, "You have a good sense of emotion in your lines." I smiled, awkwardly brushing a strand of hair from my face. Maybe that's because there's a lot I'm not saying out loud. He chuckled softly. Then let your drawing say it for you. I went home that night feeling lighter, carrying paint stains on my fingers like proof that I was still alive. Over the next few weeks, art became my escape. Each session pulled me further away from the woman who waited for someone else's validation. I noticed Daniel's distance growing too, but I no longer tried to close it. One evening, he came home late again. The scent of unfamiliar perfume followed him through the door. I asked nothing, said nothing, just smiled politely and went back to my sketch pad. That silence unsettled him more than any confrontation could. "You're different lately," he said, watching me carefully. "Maybe I'm just finally remembering who I am," I replied. He didn't understand what I meant, and I didn't bother explaining. A month passed. Adam and I talked more after class. Not flirting, just conversation that felt genuine about books, about places we wanted to visit, about how people lose themselves trying to please others. He listened without judgment, and I realized how rare that was. One evening, after class, we walked out together under the soft drizzle of spring rain. I told him about Daniel, about the "too old for love" comment, and for a moment, Adam just looked at me, eyes steady. "Anyone who says that," he said quietly, "has already forgotten what love actually means." His words settled in my chest like a seed waiting to grow. Days turned into weeks, and I started smiling again, real smiles, not the polite ones. I bought new clothes, changed my haircut, even started taking small freelance design jobs online. Daniel barely noticed. One night, I caught him whispering on the phone again. This time, I didn't feel anger. I just felt pity. Because while he was chasing something temporary, I was rediscovering something lasting myself. Then one day, Adam invited me to help with an art exhibition he was organizing. I said yes without hesitation. It was a small local gallery, nothing fancy, but standing there under those soft lights surrounded by colors and stories felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life. Adam watched me as I admired the paintings and said, "You belong in this world, Lisa. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." For the first time, I believed it. As weeks turned to months, the friendship between Adam and me deepened. We didn't rush anything. It was built on quiet trust and shared understanding. When Daniel finally confessed his affair, I didn't cry or plead. I just said, "I know." He looked shocked. "That's it?" "That's it," I said. "You already broke what we had. I'm just setting myself free." He left 2 days later, taking some clothes and his guilt with him. I watched the door close and felt an unfamiliar peace. Life after that was quiet but full. Adam became a constant presence, not to fill a void, but to share the space I had created for myself. 6 months later, during a sunset walk by the lake, he turned to me and said softly, "Lisa, I don't want to rush you, but I'd like to build something real with you." My heart skipped. I didn't answer right away, not out of fear, but because I wanted to be sure it wasn't just healing, it was love. I smiled finally and said, "Let's take it one step at a time." He agreed, and that simple honesty was more romantic than any grand promise could ever be. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of Daniel's words again, "Too old for love." But all I felt was gratitude, because those words had broken me just enough to make room for a new version of myself to grow. It had been nearly a year since Daniel left, and my life had started to feel like my own again. The silence in the house was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. I'd filled the walls with my own paintings, warm colors replacing the dull neutrals he used to prefer. My mornings started with music instead of tension, and my nights ended with laughter instead of arguments. Adam had slowly become my anchor, someone who didn't try to fix me, but simply stood beside me as I rebuilt myself. We weren't rushing toward labels or timelines, but somewhere along the way, love had quietly settled in between us, unspoken but undeniable. Then one evening, out of nowhere, my past knocked on the door. Literally. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, looking smaller somehow, his once confident posture replaced by uncertainty. "Lisa," he said softly, "can we talk?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. All those memories, all that pain, flashed through me like lightning. What could we possibly have left to talk about? I finally asked. He sighed, eyes flicking over the hallway behind me, as if searching for traces of the woman he once knew. "I made mistakes," he began, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "I hurt you. I know that. But I've realized what I lost." I almost laughed. "Daniel, you didn't lose me. You threw me away." He looked down, ashamed. I was stupid. I thought I needed something new, something exciting. But it was meaningless. She left me. Everyone left me. I want to make things right. The nerve of him showing up after all that time, expecting forgiveness like it was his right. I could have slammed the door right there, but a part of me, the part that had once loved him, needed to hear what he'd say next. "Do you even know how cruel you were?" I asked quietly. He looked up, eyes wet. I know, I see it now. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I stepped aside. Come in, I said calmly. Not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted to end this story on my terms, not his. We sat across from each other in the living room, the same room where he once told me I was too old for love. The irony wasn't lost on me. He noticed the paintings on the walls. You did all these? He asked, as if he couldn't believe it. Yes, I replied simply. They're beautiful, he murmured. You've changed. I smiled faintly. You could say I finally grew into myself. He nodded slowly, regret written all over his face. I wish I'd seen this side of you before. You couldn't have, I said. You were too busy looking for someone younger, someone easier. He winced. I deserve that. I didn't argue. He stayed for a while, talking about how lonely he'd become, how empty his life felt without me. I listened, not out of sympathy, but closure. Then, before he left, he said something that made my stomach tighten. I still love you, Lisa. Maybe it's too late, but I had to tell you. I took a deep breath and met his eyes. You don't love me, Daniel. You love the memory of control you once had. I'm not that woman anymore. He looked stunned, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Is there someone else? He asked finally. I paused, then smiled. Yes, his face fell. Does he make you happy? He doesn't make me anything, I said softly. He just lets me be. That silence between us felt like justice. He nodded, swallowed hard, and walked out. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, breathing deeply. My hands were shaking, but not from pain, from relief. That night, I called Adam and told him everything. He listened quietly, then said, You did the right thing. You didn't let anger define your closure. It still hurts, I admitted. It's supposed to, he replied gently. But look at you. You faced the ghost and didn't let it haunt you anymore. His words stayed with me. Over the next few months, Daniel tried calling, texting, even sending flowers, but I ignored every attempt. I wasn't angry anymore, I just didn't care. Then one day, an unexpected opportunity arrived, an invitation to a large art exhibit in the city. My work had been noticed online, and they wanted to feature me among emerging artists. It felt surreal. I spent weeks preparing, pouring my heart into every brushstroke, every piece. Adam was there through it all, my biggest supporter. On the night of the event, as the gallery lights glowed and people admired my work, I realized how far I'd come from the woman who once cried over a broken marriage to the woman standing tall, celebrated for her art and resilience. When the host called me to the stage to say a few words, I looked out at the audience and smiled. I spoke about loss, rediscovery, and the beauty of starting over. Sometimes, I said into the microphone, we believe the people who tell us we're not enough. But love, real love, begins when we start believing in ourselves again. The applause that followed felt like healing. Adam stood in the crowd, clapping, eyes shining with pride. Later that night, he took my hand and said, Lisa, I've never met anyone stronger. I smiled and whispered, Neither have I. But deep inside, I knew this story wasn't quite finished yet. Because life has a strange way of testing whether your healing is real or just temporary, And my final test was still waiting around the corner. The night of the exhibition was supposed to be perfect. My paintings were displayed under soft golden light. People were admiring them, and Adam stood beside me, proud and steady. I felt like I was finally breathing after years of drowning in silence. But just when I thought I had left the past behind, I heard a voice I hadn't expected to ever hear again. "Lisa?" It was Daniel. For a split second, my body froze. The sound of his voice carried a ghost of familiarity, one that I had worked hard to forget. I turned slowly, and there he was standing near one of my larger canvases, dressed sharply but with tired eyes. The crowd around us blurred into a distant hum. "You came," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm. He smiled weakly. "I saw your name on the invite list online. I wanted to see your work." His eyes scanned the paintings with a kind of regretful awe. "They're incredible." "Thank you," I replied curtly. He shifted awkwardly. "You've changed so much." "That seems to be a theme lately," I said, then gestured toward Adam, who had just walked up with 2 glasses of champagne. "Daniel, this is Adam, my fiance." The word slipped out naturally, though technically, Adam hadn't proposed yet. We were close, deeply in love, and I knew he'd been planning to ask me soon. But saying it in that moment wasn't about status, it was about reclaiming the dignity Daniel had once stripped away. Adam looked at me, a little surprised, but his hand instinctively found mine, warm and steady. "Nice to meet you," he said politely, his tone calm but confident. Daniel's expression cracked for just a second before he forced a smile. "Fiance? Wow, that's fast." "It's been over a year," I said softly. "Not that it's any of your concern." He nodded slowly, swallowing whatever pride he had left. "I'm happy for you," he said, though his voice betrayed him. Adam excused himself to greet another guest, leaving Daniel and me standing near the edge of the crowd. "You really love him, don't you?" Daniel asked quietly. "Yes," I said simply. "And the best part is, he loves me back without making me feel like I have to prove I'm worthy of it." He looked down, guilt written across his face. "I didn't know what I had." "No," I said. "You just thought you'd never lose it." There was a long pause before he spoke again. Can I see you sometime? Just to talk?" I shook my head. "You've already said everything that needed to be said. You taught me something valuable, Daniel. You taught me that the cruelest thing a person can do isn't leaving, it's making someone believe they're not enough." His eyes glistened, and for a moment I saw the man I once loved, the one who used to hold my hand when the world felt heavy. But that man was gone long ago, replaced by someone who only remembered love when it was convenient. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said firmly, turning away. I walked toward Adam, who looked at me with quiet understanding. Later that night, when we got home, he asked softly, "Are you okay?" I nodded, exhaling deeply. "I am now." We sat together on the couch, and he took my hand. "I didn't know we were engaged," he said with a small smile. I laughed for the first time that night. "Neither did I, but maybe we should be?" His eyes softened, and he reached into his jacket pocket. My heart stopped when he pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to wait until next week," he said, smiling. "But I guess the universe decided otherwise." When he opened it, I couldn't stop the tears that spilled down my cheeks. It wasn't just about love, it was about being seen, truly seen, for who I was. Yes, I whispered. 1,000 times yes. We spent the night talking, dreaming, planning. And somewhere between laughter and quiet moments, I realized something important. My revenge wasn't about hurting Daniel. It was about showing him and myself that life continues beautifully even after someone breaks you. Over the next few months, our engagement made headlines in the local art community. Photos of me and Adam appeared online, smiling, holding hands, radiant. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Daniel. "You look happy," it said. "You deserve it." I stared at the screen for a while before replying, "I always did." That was the last message we ever exchanged. But a part of me still wondered if he'd truly understood the lesson. Months later, fate gave me the answer. The Art Council invited me to a charity gala, and as luck would have it, Daniel's company was one of the sponsors. I didn't plan to speak with him, but when he saw me across the hall, he froze. This time, he was the one watching from the shadows as I laughed and mingled, as people recognized me not as someone's wife, but as someone's success. The tables had turned not out of spite, but through growth. And I could feel him realizing it, the quiet power of my existence without him. When Adam came over and wrapped an arm around me, I caught Daniel's eye for the briefest second. He looked away first. That was my victory. I didn't need to raise my voice or seek revenge. My happiness was the answer he never expected. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like a dream. Everything was falling into place, and for once, it wasn't because I forced it, it was because I was finally living a life that felt right. Adam and I were planning a small ceremony, nothing extravagant, just close friends, family, and a quiet garden filled with flowers. I spent my mornings painting invitations by hand, my afternoons helping with arrangements, and my evenings talking with Adam about our future. It was peaceful, joyful, genuine. I didn't think much about Daniel anymore. He was a ghost that had long stopped haunting me. But ghosts, I've learned, don't disappear until they're ready. One morning, as I was leaving the cafe after meeting a friend, I saw him across the street, Daniel. He looked different, thinner, older, as if time had been less kind to him than it had been to me. For a moment, our eyes met, and he crossed the street. I thought about walking away, pretending not to see him, but something in his face stopped me. "Lisa," he said softly, almost breathlessly, "can we talk? Just one last time." I sighed. "Daniel, there's nothing left to say." "Please," he pleaded. 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I nodded. We sat on a bench nearby, the morning sun casting soft shadows on the pavement. He looked at me the way people look at something precious they know they can't have. "You look incredible," he said quietly. "Happier than I've ever seen you." "That's because I am," I replied. "Adam's a good man. He treats me like a partner, not an accessory." He nodded, staring at his hands. "I know I hurt you. I know there's no fixing that, but I need to say this before it's too late. I miss you. I think about you every day." His voice broke slightly, and for a second, I saw the vulnerable man I once believed in. But pity isn't love. Daniel, I said gently, you don't miss me. You miss the stability I gave you. You miss being adored by someone who believed in you even when you didn't deserve it. That's not love, that's regret. He blinked, visibly struggling to find words. Maybe you're right, but can't we at least be friends? I smiled sadly. Friends don't destroy each other and then ask to start over like nothing happened. He looked away, his jaw tightening. You're marrying him, aren't you? Yes, I said without hesitation. Next month. He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. I just wish I'd realized what I had before it was gone. So do I whispered. But sometimes losing something is the only way to make room for something better. He stood up, trying to steady his voice. You really love him? Completely, I said, because he never made me question if I deserved love. For a long moment, we just stood there, two people who had shared a life and were now on opposite sides of its ruins. Then he said, Goodbye, Lisa. Goodbye, Daniel. He walked away slowly, shoulders slumped, and I knew in my heart that was truly the last time I'd ever see him. But life has a strange sense of irony. 2 weeks before the wedding, as I was finalizing arrangements at the art gallery where Adam and I first met, Daniel showed up again. He wasn't calm this time, he was desperate. Lisa, please, he said, grabbing my arm before I could walk away. Don't marry him. You're making a mistake. I froze, shocked by the sudden intrusion. Daniel, let go, I said firmly. I'm not doing this with you. You don't love him, he said frantically. You can't. You loved me. I pulled my arm free and took a step back. No, Daniel. I loved who I thought you were. There's a difference. His voice cracked. He can't love you like I did. I stared at him for a long moment, calm and steady. You're right, I said quietly. He doesn't love me like you did. He loves me better. The words hit him like a wave, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes shatter, the illusion that he still had power over me. Why are you doing this? He whispered. Why do you have to rub it in? I'm not, I said softly. I'm living my life. You're the one still standing in the past. He looked lost, defeated. I thought you'd always be there. You shouldn't have mistaken my patience for permanence, I said. Everyone leaves eventually when they're no longer seen. He didn't reply. He just turned and walked out of the gallery, shoulders shaking. I watched him go, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just peace. When I told Adam about it that night, he listened quietly, then said, He's still trapped in the version of you he broke. I nodded. And I've outgrown it. We sat in silence for a while before he took my hand and said, Promise me something. What? That you'll never let anyone convince you you're too old for love again. Not even yourself? I smiled through tears. I promise. That night, as I lay in bed beside the man who truly saw me, I realized my revenge had already been completed long before the confrontation. It wasn't about proving Daniel wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. I was loved, I was enough, and I had rebuilt everything he tried to tear down. But fate, it seemed, had one final scene left for me. Before the story could end, the morning of my wedding felt like standing at the edge of a new world. The air was cool, the sky brushed with soft pink and gold, and the garden smelled of jasmine and fresh roses. I could hear gentle laughter outside as friends and family arrived, the soft shuffle of chairs being set and music warming up in the distance. I stood before the mirror in my simple white dress, not extravagant but elegant, the kind of beauty that comes from peace, not perfection. My reflection stared back at me, 41 years old, lines around my eyes, but every one of them told a story I was proud of. For the first time in years, I felt completely at home in my own skin. My best friend, Julia, came in holding a bouquet of soft blush flowers. "You ready?" she asked with a teasing grin. I smiled. "More than I've ever been." She adjusted my veil and said, "You know, he's out there smiling like a schoolboy." I've never seen Adam this happy. My heart softened at her words. "That makes two of us." We both laughed, and for a moment, all the pain that once lived inside me felt like a distant echo. As I walked down the aisle, the sunlight filtered through the trees, catching in the petals scattered along the path. Adam stood waiting at the end, eyes glistening, his smile tender and unwavering. I felt tears welling up as I took each step closer to him. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration that love had no timeline, that healing could bloom even from heartbreak. When I reached him, he took my hands gently, and in that small gesture, I felt everything, every promise, every moment of patience, every silent understanding. The officiant began the ceremony, but I could barely hear the words. All I saw was him, and all I felt was gratitude. When it was time for vows, I spoke from the deepest place in my heart. "I once believed love had an age limit," I said softly, my voice trembling. "That it faded when youth faded. But then I learned that love doesn't care about time, it cares about truth. You've taught me that being loved isn't about being perfect. It's about being seen, even in the moments you feel invisible." Adam's eyes shimmered with emotion as he whispered his vows back to me. "You've taught me that the right person doesn't complete you. They remind you that you were whole all along." The guests smiled, some wiping tears, and when the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, applause filled the garden. For the first time in a long time, I cried not out of pain, but joy. After the ceremony, as we danced under strings of golden lights, I noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of the crowd. Daniel. He was half hidden behind a group of guests, wearing a dark suit, looking uncertain, almost fragile. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. I didn't feel anger or hate, not even discomfort, just a quiet acceptance. He gave a small nod, almost like an apology, then turned and walked away into the evening light. That was closure. No grand confrontation, no final words, just peace between two souls who had once been bound by love and undone by pride. Later, as the music slowed, Adam pulled me close and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded against his chest. "More than okay." We swayed together, slow and steady, surrounded by laughter and warmth. In that moment, I realized how life works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it breaks you to rebuild you. Sometimes it takes someone saying you're too old for love to make you realize that love is timeless when it's real. As the night ended and the guests left one by one, I stood under the fairy lights, watching the candles flicker out. Adam came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "What are you thinking?" He asked softly. Just how far I've come, I said. How strange it is that something so painful brought me here. He kissed my shoulder gently. Then maybe it wasn't pain, it was direction. I smiled. He was right. Maybe Daniel's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was the beginning I needed. Months later, during an interview for a magazine that featured my artwork, the journalist asked me, "What inspired your latest collection?" "It feels deeply personal." I smiled and said, "It's about rediscovery." About the idea that love isn't something you find in another person, it's something you find in yourself first. And once you do, the right person just fits into that piece. When the article was published, one line from it went viral. Asterisk, she was told she was too old for love. So she became proof that love doesn't age, it evolves. I framed that line and hung it in my studio. It reminded me of every tear, every sleepless night, every quiet moment of strength. Because in the end, revenge didn't come from anger or payback. It came from living well, from thriving, from becoming the woman he thought I'd never be. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't making someone regret losing you, it's never needing them again. I learned that love doesn't have an expiration date. Only people do. And the moment I stopped waiting for someone to validate my worth was the moment I finally found peace. I looked at the ring on my finger, at the life I built, and whispered quietly to myself, I wasn't too old for love. I was just too early for the wrong one.